morning. Welcome to Viewpoint, your program of personalities, politicians, and perspectives. We have a personality, and we certainly may have a perspective or two this morning. Our sidekick and major part of Viewpoint is not able to be with us this morning, and so we'll tip a hat to Judy since she can't be with us this morning and give her our best. Kudos. Dan, we always start Viewpoint with a kudo or two for the community. I think it'd be very appropriate to tip our hats and toss a kudo to Brenda McCabe, who just completed a lengthy service for the city of Lincoln and just recently retired. Did a great job for us, and so kudos to Brenda. And,
absolutely.
Thank you to her for her great service to our community down through the many years. And I'd like to kind of toss one over to Vinegar Hill way. Last Saturday night they had a fundraiser. They're working on funds to try to get some big money, heavy money, to save that courthouse.
Right.
And my goodness, if anything in building should be saved in Logan County, it would be that Logan County courthouse over there on Mount Pulaski, up on the hill there. And we've had Tom Martin on before to talk about that. And he and his group over there pulled off a good coup. They had a nice crowd over there at Mount Pulaski at a meeting Saturday night, a nice little dinner at the Brickyard. I had to stop and think where we were. I'd never been in that former bowling alley before. Nicely done. So, welcome to Dan Tackett. It was suggested to me by a dear friend, as a matter of fact, Libby Anderson's who it was, that perhaps we ought to try to be a little more controversial once in a while.
Thanks a lot.
In serving, instead of serving up milk toast and pablum or cream of wheat and pablum, we ought to try to get into a little controversy once in a while. And her point was well made and well accepted. Dan's not necessarily controversial, but he's been known to lob a grenade or two in City Hall's way and so forth. So I thought it might be fun to visit with Mr. Dan Tackett, who has a great career in the newspaper business here in Logan County. Mr. Tackett, let's just take it from the, as they say in show business, take it from the top, or let's go to reverse and take it to the bottom. How did you get started in the newspaper business? By the way, Jim, he's just a fair to mid good writer. No, I've had an occasion to send Dan an email a time or two and tell him he was a doggone good writer. Tell us where you got started in the media, Dan.
Well, I'll tell you exactly how I got started.
Yeah, I want to know exactly. I don't want to tiptoe around.
I think this goes back to my grade school years. I grew up in Tazewell County, and the old man, that's my stepdad, but I always referred to him as the old man, was an avid newspaper reader, and we took the Pantograph in the morning and took the Pekin Daily Times in the afternoon. And I think I read every edition from cover to cover from the time I was in the 5th or 6th grade. So I really had a love for newspapers. After high school, after graduating from high school up in Armington, about 5 or 6 months. Hiddle Township High School, absolutely.
Yeah. And you thought I was just another pretty face.
Right, yeah. My first job was at the former Lincoln State School. And it took me about 6 months to realize I was not cut out for that kind of work.
Yeah.
So I started looking elsewhere and ended up in a factory in Bloomington, the Eureka Williams factory that was and still is known for its vacuum cleaners. Well, I was working on a line, and I would pick up two small aluminum castings that were coming down the line, put them in a drill fixture, push a button, and it was a multiple drill that drilled several holes in the two castings. Take them off the fixture, move them on down the line, grab the other two. Working 6 days a week, 10 hours a day. And I didn't take me long to find out what I was drilling. They were nose cones for bombs that were being eventually shipped to Vietnam
Interesting.
in the war effort.
Interesting.
And
They were doing government work up there even then. I thought that during the
Yes.
Second War I knew that was the case, but I didn't know that continued.
right. And anyway, it didn't take very long for boredom to set in
I
on
can
that
imagine,
job.
yeah.
So again, I found myself job hunting, and I was already married at the time, so I didn't have the luxury of quitting
Right.
one job before I had another one. Well, I ended up in a small machine shop in Bloomington. It was a job shop that, we did work for Caterpillar, a company called Modine, which made radiators for Caterpillar. And I really enjoyed that work because it was a small shop, probably a dozen workers.
Little camaraderie there with
Little camaraderie, plus I really learned a lot. They'd never stick you on one machine like the multiple drill that I was working on at Eureka Williams. You'd work on one machine for a couple of weeks and then train you on a different type of machine. So it was pretty varied and not boring at all. And one day I was working on it was called a horizontal boring machine. And you're putting these little cast iron castings in. You'd flip a little lever at the end, and an air vise would come up and hold that casting in place while it was internally bored. Well, one day, I think I was probably talking to somebody at my machine and not paying attention to what I was doing, and I smashed a finger.
that hurt.
It hurt. It actually kind of give you an idea how healthcare has changed since those days.
Don't get there.
Yeah, I went to the emergency room, and they quickly hooked me up with an orthopedic surgeon who removed some of the smashed bone. It was a pretty serious injury, actually, and reshaped my finger. But I was in the hospital for 3 days with that thing.
Think of that.
Yeah, absolutely. They had never
treat you in
even
the
thought of an overnight stay, or a 3-hour
Get
stay.
the shot, send you home.
Get him in, get him out. So then I got to thinking. By that time, I was already pretty deeply immersed in learning how to play guitar. And here I am 50 years later, and I'm still learning how to play guitar, by the way. But
That's why I call him Fiddler.
yeah. So I thought, maybe it isn't a good thing for me to be working with my hands around machinery. And again, looking for something more suitable, I answered an ad that was in the Courier for a halftime reporter. And I replied to that. Ken Goodrich was the managing editor at the Courier at that time, and I know you knew him, Bill.
Very well.
Very well. And anyway, as part of the application process, I was given a couple of writing assignments. Can't even remember what they were. Well, I do. I think one of them was Armington in that entire Tazewell/McLean/Woodford County area were getting pretty serious about school consolidation. And that was one of my writing assignments to gauge how the small towns felt about that. And most of the townsfolk were pretty opposed to losing their schools and consolidating.
That was common in those days.
Yes, indeed.
That was a kind of the collecting point for those small communities, their own schools.
Right.
And they had a natural and understandable proprietary interest in not losing those.
Right. Anyway, I did my assignments, submitted them to Ken Goodrich, and I didn't hear from him for a couple of weeks. So I started calling him. And I was pretty persistent, because I really wanted that job. Always, like I say, always loved newspapers. I excelled at English in high school. Let's not talk about my math grades or my performance in math class, but and by golly, Ken Goodrich gave me the excuse, we have to wait to get past the Logan County Fair, and then we'll make a decision. Well, I was selected for that job, and I went to work September 1st. Oh, the year, gosh, 69 maybe. on a halftime basis. When it happened, the Joy family from Centralia had very recently purchased the Courier from the Nugents, Mr. and Mrs. Nugents.
So you missed working under Elaine and John Nugent.
Yes.
Well, that's another story.
I can imagine. And they wanted to expand the Courier into Mason County. And they had created this halftime position. And I was living in the country up by Armington at that time. And I would leave home every morning, head to Havana to the courthouse, and then swing into Mason City and stop at City Hall to get their police reports and everything. And I would jot my notes down and call in before noon every day, and they would get fresh Mason County news in. Well, that was in September. The following February, Uncle Sam came calling.
Yes.
And I did my 2-year stint in the Army. And I had no job waiting me back home except the Courier. So I went to see Ken Goodrich on a leave about 2 months before I was due to come home, and he says, we're getting ready to have a full-time opening. Would you be interested? And sure, I was interested.
Would I?
Really, yeah. Really had no idea what the job would entail, but anyway, I took it and started out at just an ungodly low salary. But anyway, as they say, the rest is history.
So that got you started in the media business.
Yes.
And how long were you with the Courier before you retired, Dan?
A week shy of my 45th anniversary.
And at some point in time, you became managing editor then before you... This is during the consolidation and so forth, when they were changing the time when they were being on the street from... where was that in your career when we quit doing an afternoon publishing and then to a morning publishing?
Well, you got to remember, I'm an old man, Bill, and I don't do well with dates. Probably...
At some point in time, and where were we?
Around 2000, I would say.
And then...
actually, to answer your question, I did 2 stints as managing editor. I succeeded Bill Martini, you remember Bill, as managing editor. Bill was a longtime sports editor and was promoted to managing editor actually when Ken Goodrich retired. He took Ken Goodrich's place. And I worked under Bill for several years. And Bill decided he wanted to get into the professional photography business, and he bought Bill Hardin's studio. And I was promoted to managing editor and served in that capacity for a couple of years, 3 years maybe. And the Joy family put the Courier up for sale, and it was purchased by Copley Press out of San Diego, which at that time had a very strong presence in central Illinois with the State Journal-Register. And later, Copley also purchased the Peoria Journal-Star.
Right.
And by the way, they were a terrific company to work for, so I have no ill feelings whatsoever. But I remember the week that they purchased this, the publisher, the State Journal-Register, met with me and informed me that they wanted to bring in their own editor. And they had no intention of laying me off, terminating my job or anything. And I was also told that the new editor would be a fellow by the name of John Plufka, whom I'd known years before because John Plufka was a stringer for the State Journal-Register. There might be some people out there don't know what a stringer was or is. Okay, a stringer is a very part-time person, similar to the old small-town correspondence. You would... Aunt Martha in New Holland calls the music. Right. a good time was had by all with the afternoon callers.
Yeah, right.
John obviously writing for a much bigger newspaper, the State Journal-Register, dealt strictly with pretty high-level stories, covered city council, county board, did the crime beat in Logan County, and he was paid by the piece, but he was going to school and, gave him a little spending money. But John and I just hit it off infamously when he worked here as a stringer. He was a Kansas farm kid, just a great guy. And I remember his first day of week because that was the day the shuttle exploded.
Oh, yeah.
That was today.
Is that right? Wow. Anyway, John and I met, and I said, hey, I says, I've made up my mind. I intend to stay here, and I just want you to know, because I was bumped down to a lowly reporter from managing editor. I just want you to know, John, that, hey, I'll do whatever I can do to put out a quality newspaper, and don't be afraid to step on me, walk on me, whatever. Just tell me what you need done. And we got along great. As a matter of fact, John was probably my biggest influence in my whole career as far as work ethic and doing what needed to be done to get the job done.
Tell me.
And anyway, if I could just continue this, I worked for John for about 2 months, and he made arrangements with the publisher at Springfield to promote me to city editor.
Okay.
And I served in that capacity until Gatehouse purchased the newspaper, and I was promoted to managing editor, and that was a post I held for the last 5 years of my career.
What do you see Gatehouse doing insofar as small newspapers are concerned? And we are, face the facts, in Lincoln we're a small newspaper. Do you think Gatehouse is going to continue to support newspapers in small communities? That's a guess.
I think it's a financial question for them.
Oh, yeah, bottom line, Yeah, bottom line, are we making enough money on advertising?
Exactly.
I mean, that's the genesis of the whole thing.
Exactly. They it's no secret around town, and I'm not bad-mouthing Gatehouse by saying so, but they've vastly reduced the staff, and
and
as a result, the product shows it.
Yeah. Oh yeah, got good people on trying hard.
Very good people,
but they're limited to what they can do.
Exactly.
All right, now in your career with the Courier as a reporter or as a managing editor, anywhere in your, is there any one particular? We've had a lot of them during your long career. Episodes or incidents that come to mind immediately that you might want to recount for us?
I was thinking this morning, wondering what you might ask me, and I thought that question might come up.
Oh, I'm devious. I'm liable to throw one from the left field for you.
That'd be great. That'd be great. Life's all about how you swing at those curveballs God throws at you.
Exactly.
One thing that really stands out in my mind was when Ronald Reagan came to town on his campaign. Down on the courthouse square. I'd never seen such a throng of people on the courthouse square.
Never will again.
And never will again. Yeah. And I remember, as you did when you worked for a small town newspaper, you were not only the reporter but also the photographer. We didn't have a full-time photographer. So I had to get myself in a position where I could take good photos. Well, whoever had planned the event had set up 2 hay racks kind of at the rear of the crowd on Broadway Street for the photographers and the electronic news crews, So that's where I got stuck at it. You couldn't have squeezed a 3-month-old infant on those hay racks. And it was my first exposure to just a huge media event. something to kind of rival that is when Mitsubishi opened. Governor Thompson was involved in the opening ceremonies up there, and I can remember being in this crowd of reporters, and Thompson was talking to us, and I raised my camera up to take a picture, and Thompson pointed at me and says, "Hey, you still got your lens cap on." That was a pretty memorable moment, too. Great photographer that you were. Right.
Well, we're going to take, that might be a good spot to take it. We'd better take the lens cap off of our sponsors and acknowledge them for a few seconds here. Then we're going to get back. We're going to visit more with Dan Tackett, retired editor of Lincoln Courier, and we'll always call him Fiddler. So go ahead, Jim. Welcome back to Viewpoint, the program personalities, politicians, and perspectives. So we have a personality this morning and a few perspectives. 648-5510. Our guest is Dan Tackett, retired editor of the Lincoln Courier, which used to be delivered in the afternoons many years ago. When did it become a morning newspaper, Dan? Do you recall that?
Boy, I don't exactly. I'd say 2000, maybe even a little later than that.
Yeah, a little later, perhaps, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know whether that was a good change or not, but it doesn't make any difference. That's what it is.
It is, yeah. Exactly.
You know, I'm talking about columnists. I read a quote about a columnist, and it said, "A politician wouldn't dream of being allowed to call a columnist, testing 1, 2, columnist, the things a columnist is allowed to call a politician." And there's something to be said that today. All right, now, it was suggested that we try to get into something that's a little less pablum and, as I say, milquetoast. You have taken upon yourself in recent columns to lob a grenade or two in the direction of City Hall. Do you have any comments that you'd like to make this time about that? Because you've been written very, as I said before, you do a good job of writing. You're very succinct, and you get to the point and express yourself well.
I appreciate that. I guess I quibble a little bit with the term lobbing grenades. And a lot of readers, including yourself, may take it that way. I kind of look at it as more like raising questions.
Okay.
Rather than going on a full-scale attack. I think a lot of the right questions aren't being asked these days at City Hall.
Uh-huh.
A former alderman, whom I won't name, in a discussion we had a while back, referred to the city council as a bunch of bobbleheads. You know,
that wasn't very nice. No.
They just go along with whatever the mayor wants.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't see a lot of, number one, the questions, as I said, and I don't see a lot of a division up there.
Mm-hmm.
It's just too one-sided, I think, and I think a lot of times the voice of the people who are footing the bill really isn't being expressed on the council floor.
Is it possible to consider, Dan? Well, of course it's possible. I think it's appropriate to consider that maybe things are going on pretty well, and there isn't any need for asking a lot of questions. But of course, having said that, there's always a need for a governing body to ask questions of what's going on in that particular body. You know, the city council or the county board or right. Whatever.
I wouldn't discount what you indicate there, but there's an awful lot of talking going on outside the public eye, or the questions just aren't being addressed on the council floor for the public to hear. A good example is the 4% utility tax. My gosh, that was a big thump, on Lincoln residents' backs. But really the only opposition I I recall on that was the city treasurer, Chuck Hansho.
Yes. By the way, he seems to be doing a very good job for us as treasurer.
I think Chuck does a great job.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm
he
not
seems to ask questions.
And I'm not saying Keith Snyder isn't doing a good job as mayor. I mean, I think he's definitely a strong leader.
And he's definitely well-intentioned.
Oh, absolutely. I would not question his intentions at all.
Right. Mm-hmm. But do you see any glaring problems that you'd like to see addressed, Dan?
No glaring problems. It seems like the council spends like a bunch of Democrats instead of the Republicans that they are. And I think there's going to come a time when that really has to be addressed.
Is there one particular issue, looking at it from your seat in the bleachers, that needs to be addressed more immediately than others?
I think the council really needs to look at some of the basics of city government, and I would point very directly at the city's streets and sidewalks and the poor condition that they are in.
Oh, yes,
and we seem to be spending money in all kinds of arenas, but that. A relative of mine recently purchased a home on Park Place, close to Jim Ash's house here. And I hadn't been on Park Place for years, and I can remember.
Well, they wouldn't let you in there.
Exactly.
They have standards,
But I remember Park Place was one of the elite places in Lincoln to live. But I could not believe the condition of the streets, the curbs. They're horrible.
Yes, our infrastructure is not in good shape.
Right. But go down any side street in Lincoln, and they're all in horrible shape.
Well, the brick streets, which I really like, and I hope they never cover them, but they're in bad shape too.
Exactly.
All the streets in the community are, and it just takes a ton of money, and perhaps that's under study right now. Perhaps they're acquiring some long-range funds for that, but and they all know that they can't just continue to ignore the problem, because it'll do nothing but get worse. It'll exacerbate and just.
You can see they're getting worse.
Oh yeah. Tell us, Dan, your thoughts, please, on the Logan County Alliance. Jim, we invite you to chime in if you have any questions or anything.
I think, in a nutshell, I think it's a big gamble. Very similar to splitting the Art Fair and Balloon Festival into four separate
What are your
things.
thoughts about that?
I think it's a big gamble.
Well, we'll know this summer.
Exactly. Nobody's going to...
Somebody's trying something. At least they're not sitting on their thumbs and not doing anything. So trying something.
Right. I have to wonder, one of the reasons that was expressed about doing this was the inability to get this big army of volunteers to do this.
That's getting tougher.
On one weekend. And sure, it gets tougher. It's like any great thing that starts out. You have a huge army of followers and workers. And as the years progress, that army dwindles in numbers.
Yeah.
So I can understand that. But to turn around and ask for a lot of volunteers, not for one weekend, but for 4 weekends, is asking an awful lot. And I would almost bet that the same small army of volunteers will be out there for all 4 weekends, and I don't think that will last very long, many years.
Have you seen in in this Balloon Fest weekend that it's been, that's built up to be a big. Now, what's enhanced that is the barbecue cook-off. That's been a big thing.
Oh, exactly.
And that seems to draw a lot of people. By the way, just as a side issue, I'm amazed at how much money these folks invest in this equipment. So
it's incredible.
Oh, it's incredible. Yes, it is. Is there anything that you would suggest to the city fathers and the committees that you see from sitting in your spot in the bleachers that might make it better?
I'd say give it 1 year and then reassess the situation. See if things did work out better, see if the crowd sizes are satisfactory, and see if you do have enough volunteers to cover 4 weekends. But I think that should be assessed right after the first year.
Well, we just give them A for trying something different to see.
Exactly.
As I say, it's better than twiddling your thumbs and saying, well, this didn't work, what are we going to do?
Right.
Now, I suspect, looking down the road, I look forward to your columns. I'm going to see something around wind farms, I suspect.
Yes, that's my column for this Saturday.
How did I know that?
I don't know. How do you know that? As I say in my column, I'm really puzzled by the county board's split decision on this. Mainly not puzzled by the vote because those county board members stared down at a lot of voters who raised their voices on this.
Yes, that was very significant.
My main question, my point of being puzzled, I suppose, is in 2011, 2012, the Logan County Master Plan was unveiled with a lot of hoopla, a lot of fanfare and everything. And that master plan included 5 arenas where Logan County could concentrate to become more prosperous. And one of those 5 arenas was development of the county as, quote unquote, the wind capital of Illinois.
I don't think I was aware of that.
Good, bad, or indifferent. It was well publicized. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that master plan received the good graces of the city council and the county board. And it was pretty well publicized, I believe. I was actively involved at the Courier, the day-to-day news operation at that time. And I actually remember covering the day it was unveiled. It was pretty chilly November day out where Aldi's was eventually constructed. But one of those arenas, like I say, was the wind farm. And, where were these opponents? Where were the opponents on the county board to interrupting our horizons with wind turbines when that master plan was unveiled? I mean, nobody got up and said, hey, we don't want to go in this direction. But now, and it's the same old thing. This is great, but not in my backyard.
That's called the NIMBY factor, of course.
Yes. Right. So that puzzles me.
There were some...
And it also puzzles me. You mentioned the Logan County Alliance a little bit ago, which it seems to be the mother of that organization is the Chamber of Commerce, which is supposedly a voice for business. The Chamber of Commerce was silent in this entire debate, which went on over, 2 months at least?
Well, of course, that was a county issue as opposed to a corporate or city issue.
Right,
as far as that is concerned.
Don't forget, that's called the Logan County Chamber of Commerce.
Yes, that is correct.
Right. And it's also called the Logan County Alliance.
Will you take a position in your column coming up this Saturday as to whether that was a positive or a negative thing for the community?
I'll let readers decide my position after they read my column.
Well, that's definitely put aside. I thought that.
Well, that's better than a no comment, isn't it, Bill?
Well, it is. I'll give you that. So definitely put aside. The time that you have been out of the newsprint media business, have you noted any changes, Dan, for the better or for the worse, as the case may be? Have you seen anything that disturbed you or made you feel good?
Well, it always makes me feel good to walk downtown, go to Walmart, whatever, and see the smiling faces of the people who live here. Mm-hmm. We're surrounded by an awful lot of good folks who call Logan County home and Lincoln home.
You're right about that. Judy and I talk about that all the time as to how lucky we are to be in where we are.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, we still have the small town feel. Mm-hmm. And I kind of wonder on all these economic developments that, like the wind farm, that get rejected. At one time, an ethanol plant was proposed out by Eaton. It got rejected. It either got rejected or the opposition was so strong that the developers of that decided to move their project to the Hartsburg area, and that never transpired. But anyway, I have to wonder about all the precautionary measures, all the staring down the noses at developers that come up to the city council, the county board. I have to wonder if our leaders just aren't reluctant for Lincoln to outgrow its small town feel.
Well, we would like to think there will be some growth because we
need it.
If you don't grow, you regress as opposed to progress, of course.
Look at our population.
Yes, right. I think I'm going to make an observation on the wind farm, Dan, and see what your reaction to that is. I think a big portion of the objection is that the company proposing the project, they weren't very well established, and they were out of the first place. The ownership and management is out of the country, over in Italy, and they had no experience as far as wind farms in continental United States, insofar as I know, and their capitalization was a problem. Very, very smart CPA spoke up,
right,
and called attention to the fact that they were so undercapitalized that the future might not look very good.
Right.
So that's just an observation that I would make on that. Do you have any comments about that, sir?
The things you point out are correct, but by and large, I think the rejection of that was the people's voice against it. Yeah,
they turned out en masse.
They did
at these hearings, which was a good thing.
Exactly.
A comment that I made is
and you spoke at one of those hearings.
Yes,
right?
And the comment I made was essentially that the county board had an opportunity to look at some fair money that would come the county's way.
Exactly.
And sometimes, as I use the term rose-colored glasses, that looks pretty good, and then after the fact, maybe things weren't quite the way they worked out as supposed to be.
Right.
And those rose-colored glasses get a little bit cloudy.
Sure.
And so that was the essence of what I said.
Right.
Is that don't be enticed by money up front.
Exactly.
Because that was my comment and my approach to the thing.
Yeah. Well, like I say, readers can form their opinion on where I stand when they read my column.
Well, what have you got in the hopper for future columns, Mr. Tackett?
I don't. Or
maybe you're like I am on my Sunday morning swing. You don't know from one Sunday to the next what I'm going to do until I sit down to do it.
Sometimes that's the way it plays out. I remember, I think it was last year during the holiday season, I sit down to write my column and I didn't have a clue. Went through all the local news websites, nothing popped out. And I picked up my copy of the Courier that morning, and I saw where the little movie theater over in Mason City was doing some kind of fundraiser.
Yeah, the Arley group.
The Arley, absolutely. And the Maxons, by the way, John and Kay Maxon.
Great young couple. Right.
Oh, yeah, they need to be commended for not only keeping that open, but keeping it up with the times, And
they went into a lot of blood, sweat, and physical work to get that job done.
They did. But anyway, I saw where they were doing that, and wow, it made me remember when I was a little kid, and my grandma would take me to the little theater in downtown Minear. Mm-hmm. And that was my column for that week. Yeah. It was my memories of that.
Well, we all have memories. Some of them are the best, and some of them aren't so hot.
Exactly.
Dan Tackett has been our guest this morning. We didn't get quite as controversial as I might have liked, but
invite me back, Bill.
But Dan's pretty circumspect, and he likes to live in the county. He likes to be able to walk into a grocery store and say hi, Dan, instead of say, "Well, not you again." Columnist Will Rogers. You're too young to remember Will Rogers. A great besides a movie actor, great columnist.
Oh, fantastic! I read a lot of his stuff.
Well, old Will says, "I don't make jokes. I just watch the government report the facts."
Amen, brother.
And that's pretty appropriate. Thank you for Viewpoint. Thank you, Dan.